Hey, everybody, this is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today, we're talking with Albert Bramante, talent agent and coach with more than 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. He's got a PhD in psychology, and he's a certified hypnotist and NLP practitioner. He's an expert at empowering performers to overcome psychological roadblocks and achieve success. I'm super excited about this because I actually think that the mental and psychological aspects of any field, sports, entertainment, business, or whatever else, play a major role in either propelling us forward or holding us back. So, with that, welcome, Albert. Thanks a lot for joining us.
And thank you so much, Brett, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. I think you have a fascinating background. I love what you focus on and what you do because I do think it's so important. It's funny, just as an aside note, I was listening to sports radio a couple of years ago, and they had a professional NBA player on there. And they asked him at one point, he was a good player. He wasn't like the best of the best, but he was a really good NBA pro. He lasted in the league for a number of years. And they said, what is the big difference between a guy like you that makes it and other guys? And he goes, believe it or not, there's tons of guys at my level of talent. He said the problem is it's the mental game. He said a lot of the people don't have the mental toughness.
hmm
They don't have the right wiring with the way that they approach it. So even though they have the physical skill, they're not able to achieve the same level. So I thought that was fascinating. But so I have a ton of stuff I want to ask you about that. But let's start off with your personal story. Can you share your background? Give us a sense of how you started your career?
Sure. Well, I started out as always being a type of person that loved to learn. I was a very curious kid. And I spent a lot of time in the library. I was a book nerd. I still am. So I have a love of learning. I love learning new things. I'm very curious about how things work. And that's something that really kind of propelled me all throughout life. So I started reading a lot of books about the brain and nervous system, communication, self-help, therapy, and I really became just so immensely enthralled by it. So that kind of led me to, eventually pursuing psychology as a career and as a major. And but I was also very interested, starting in high school, in a bit of the creative arts. So I was in a drama club in high school. I was in a couple of theater societies in college, and then I also took some acting classes as electives in college. And I really enjoyed the process. And so that kind of like started my love, for the arts in a sense. Now, at this time, I was still determined to be a clinical psychologist. That was like my goal. And my one track focus, I was going to be a college professor and clinical psychologist. That was like my focus. Now, during my last semester in grad school for my master's degree, I landed an internship at a talk show. I don't know how it happened. It was just divine intervention. And I ended up like working, with counseling the guests afterwards and trying to find resources for them in their town and their community. And it was one of the older shows that Sally Jesse Raphael show. For those of you who don't may remember, she was the one with the big red glasses. That was like her
I remember.
trademark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up watching it, so it was kind of like a surreal experience. But it was also like my first foray into like professional show business in a sense. And it was a very eye-opening learning experience for me because I learned how like talk shows are done. And it was definitely not what I expected. So after that
It,
experience, I kind of vowed that I would never want to work in talk shows again.
what was it? I'm just curious. What was it about it that was different than what you expected, and
It
what
was
sort
very
of turned you off?
scripted. So now, for those of you who are heavy viewers of the show, would always say, "Oh, Sally cares so much, and she really is over involved in the show and helping her guests." I'm like, no. Um, what happens is a half an hour before the show tapes, the producers brief her about what the guests are. She is then reading a teleprompter and also has an earpiece where they're feeding her lines and feeding her questions and remarks. And during the segment breaks, she goes backstage to get more briefings and more reply her makeup. But a lot of the guests had said would try to engage with her when the commercial, during the commercial segment, and she just became a different person, like shunning everybody. Like I don't want to. I'm not talking to you. Um, so that was the big thing, and what also was really, I think, not sitting well with me ethically wise was it was all about ratings. So whatever they needed to do to get someone to walk up the stage, throw a chair, start crying, they did it, and they did it unapologetically. So the one instance was, I'll say, that really kind of solidified it is there was a couple that I had talked to after the show. Initially, the guy, it was about forgiveness, and the guy did in real life did step out, do some bad things in his marriage. But prior to the show, they had already reconciled. But they thought it was going to be a good show about forgiveness. Well, when they got on into the studio, they separated the husband and the wife, and they started to tell the wife, whatever you do not accept his apology. Tell him you want a divorce and demand a divorce. And she at first she's like, I'm not going to do that, or we already made up. And they're like, well, if you don't do that, you're not getting your ticket back home. You're going to be stranded here. And then they instigated him by saying, you're not going to, your wife is not going to forgive you, and she's mad. This is the last straw. So they were already emotionally charged by the time they got on. And then, of course, it happened. And then that guest, when I spoke to the guy, and, he was nice to me, but he, like, no uncertain terms, like, I never wanted to do a show again.
That's shocking. Wow. I mean,
So
obviously, there's some of it's performative, but I'm surprised that it's that manipulated. That's crazy.
And when now, of course, years later, I've talked to other people in other shows, and they very said it's a very similar experience. Like the host it's really a persona. It's not what you're seeing very often when you watch a talk show is not the real host at all. Which of course, again, now in my experience in show business, I totally understand. It's an act. It's a persona. So that was kind of like where I'm like, yeah, I don't think I want to do this again. It was great. I'm grateful for the experience, but it was not something I wanted to pursue anymore. Um, but anyway, after that experience, this is right around the same year of 9/11 in New York, and so I was, being out of Jersey, very close. I met up with the person, the team that kind of I was working with under Sally, and we just started doing some volunteer work around 9/11 and crisis intervention work, which also included a team of actors. So I kind of rekindled. I was like, well, let me try the acting thing. I was like in it and tried it in college and high school. So I did that for like a year and a half while I was working. I was only really a part-time actor, and it wasn't for me. But I really found myself loving the environment of being around actors, and so that's how kind of I started with the working with actors, supporting actors as much as I can.
That's interesting. And then obviously you had your general love of the whole psychology element of it to begin with. Is that what made you, well, I guess, what made you identify then the specific thing that you went into? So you enjoyed working with actors. That makes total sense. You enjoyed the psychology piece. What made you think, oh, you know what? I think I'll bring these things together, and I think I'll
Yeah.
help people that are struggling or
Well, so when I started my business representing actors, the one thing that kept coming was self-sabotage and imposter syndrome, and just really, these actors were being their own worst enemy. And it wasn't just one; it was many. So I couldn't. kind of figure this out. So while I was going for a PhD, because I still wanted to honor the goal I had, which was to be a clinical psychologist. So we have to do a dissertation, and our the advice that I received for picking a topic for dissertation is pick a burning question. And so the burning question that I had was, why are these actors self-sabotaging?
I love that. That's a great question. I'm curious myself.
And so that was like how that was born in a sense.
Very cool. Very cool. So then that led you on this journey of sort of connecting the two and saying, all right, how can I use my my psychology understanding background education and use that in a way where you can deploy it to help people that you like being around and being in that environment anyway. So
Hmm.
it's amazing. I mean, it's such a natural fit, but it's interesting how you came to that because it wasn't like some people grow up and they think, oh, I want to be a a NASA astronaut, or I want to be a pediatrician or something, and yours is sort of a combination of two different things, but fascinating both. And I think also the perfect marriage of things because I think there's such a need for that there, right? I mean, I can only
Hmm.
imagine in that industry with the pressure and the competition and walking into a casting room or whatever, seeing all these other people, I can imagine how if you had any insecurity, how much smaller it would make you feel right away, knowing, look at all the competition, especially if you recognize anybody and you feel like, oh, they're better than I am, So that yeah, that's amazing. Um, and so I know how did you actually start working with them in this capacity? Like, did you set up the business first and then go out and try to find actors that needed help, or did you happen to run into actors that needed help them, and then your business grew out of that?
Well, I started working with actors, like representing them so career-wise as an agent. So that really means as an employment agent. That's what I still do, and that's what I've been doing. But it wasn't until I really completed my dissertation that I realized it was a much greater need too. And so that's when I started like applying like kind of like performance mindset coaching, which so even though I'm certified in hypnosis and NLP, I don't really consider myself as purely a hypnotist or pure NLP practitioner. I consider myself a more of a performance mindset coach, which uses a lot of the principles of hypnosis and NLP, but not, in a standard way. So I really felt like it just was work was kind of born out of necessity because again, why are these actors self-sabotaging? Why are, so many people, really dealing with this imposter syndrome? And also, it's a very tough industry to be in, the acting industry,
Yeah.
performing arts, show business, because it's so competitive and overly saturated.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is, and I'll be honest with you. I've seen actors that are in big productions, and I've said I know actors that are better than that, right?
Hmm.
So it isn't all a skills game. Now we all know the politics of it, right? In any industry, if you have a connection or you're related to somebody, that's always going to give you a leg up. But if we eliminate that element of it, and we just look at the actors that get cast for various roles. First of all, it's fascinating to me, how often like you'll see people in a role and you say, I've seen better performances than this. I don't even understand how they were cast for that because there's definitely people that are more talented than that could do this role better. But the other part of it is, you see these stories of the biographies of people and how
Hmm.
circumstantial they caught a lucky break here, they were cast for something that they were never supposed to be, right? And then it just works out. I mean, some of that's obviously the preparedness, so you're there to take advantage of the opportunity when you get it, but some of it, we've got to be honest, has something to do with luck and circumstance, right? I mean,
Right, of course. Yeah,
yeah.
and it's kind of like a combination of both, like luck, circumstance, but also being, as we were saying earlier, being mentally on top of it and having the inner or mental game is so important, like in a sense, your mental state So state control. So it's really a combination of that, and um, because at that point you have more luck in a sense. Now you can even unpack the context of luck, and a lot of it has to do with your mindset. Some people have the notion that people are just naturally lucky and unlucky, but that has also tied into your mindset. So because our brains are very interesting, complex pieces of equipment, they will look for things. So if I have the notion that I'm unlucky, my brain is going to look for so many instances that's going to confirm the notion that I'm unlucky. The same thing if on the other hand, if I walk around saying I'm lucky, I'm going to find so many opportunities to show that I'm lucky. So one thing, especially working with actors, if you already are coming into this with I'm a starving artist, the same principle is going to happen. You're going to look for instances that are going to make you struggle, that are going to show that you're a struggling actor. Because your brain is listening to the command. Your subconscious mind is saying, okay, I hear you. So,
It's and I 100% resonate with that because I've seen that circumstance even in my own life. Sometimes like you can look at the same circumstance from two different perspectives and come out with two different outcomes. I
mhm,
remember back in college, I was in a business training thing, and a guy was telling the story about it was one of these network marketing companies, and he had said that they were training people on how to build their network or whatever it is, and so the one person said, he got two calls over the weekend. One said, tried to build my business, and I talked to five people, and three people already heard of it. I think it's overly saturated. I can't do this. He got another call from another person who said, I had a picnic this weekend. Five people were there. Three of them had already heard of it. I've already signed up two of them. So completely the same exact circumstance, two completely different expectations. When the one person heard that they had heard of it, assumed they weren't interested and shut down. The other person was said, "Oh, you've already heard of it. Great. I even have even less to convince you of. Then here's the paperwork.
yeah.
Sign up." Right. And so 100% there's an element of that. So um, fear of failure, I know, is a major obstacle that a lot of people face, whether they're in the entertainment industry, entrepreneurs, whatever else.
Of
How can people
course.
reframe their view of failure? Like, how can
So,
people look at failures in a positive way?
so one way to look at that is feedback, and the idea of the concept of failing forward. So it's you're one step. You can look at it as one step closer to success, and rather than as a setback, saying, "Okay, this is feedback. This is great information." Um, Now, and I use this example for anybody who's a parent. If you when you're with a child, especially a toddler who's learning to walk, they struggle with so much initial failure in the beginning, falling down, wobbly balance. You'll never see them give up. I've never met anyone who said walking is not for me. And you don't really hear parents say, you know what, son, daughter, yeah, pursue something else. So it's the same principle. If we can take that same mentality towards anything else we're doing, that persistence, that determination that we learn from our little ones, that they can be impactful for other areas of our life. See, most of the time a lot of people, they'll do one or two things, they'll fail. Um, they'll try this, it doesn't work, and automatically, okay, I'm done. Put the towel in or the white flag. I'm done. I'm finished. Rather than, okay, this approach might not have worked. Let's try something else. And that's why we see a lot of turnover rate, especially with actors, or even creators too. It's like, or content creators. They have this notion that okay, I'm going to do this one thing. I'm going to get success. If I don't, I'm done. And especially with actors, because it's such a tough industry and competitive industry that even well-meaning people in their lives. Okay, we've been trying this thing for 6 months. Maybe it's time to pursue something else. Especially if you're in a family that's not into show business, which a lot of actors, this is common for so many actors, that they're in families that are not keen on the business. They're not knowledgeable of the business. So they'll see they'll at the holiday dinners. So what have you been in? Well, I'm still working, to get into something. And then you'll hear crickets at the table saying like, well, maybe this is not for you. And in any other profession, that might be moderately somewhat true, but not here. And so it really requires a lot of determination and in a sense, looking at again as failure as feedback and not letting it hold you back. So the mistakes you make are like getting you closer to the success that you're going to achieve. If you incorporate the learning from each one. So if you learn from your mistake, you're not going to make the same mistake twice. So it can't hurt to try something new. So even if that doesn't work, okay, try something new.
Yeah, keep adjusting your approach. I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and business people, and regardless of where they are today, even if they're at the mountaintop, the number one thing, the most common answer I get when I ask them, what is sort of the key to success, right? Most people say persistence, never give up. It's not about the genius idea. It's not because that stuff comes through the crucible of going through the work, going through the trial and error and bumping your head. You start to dial in what you need to do to make it work. So as long as, like you said, you're learning from each
Hmm.
opportunity and you're asking yourself, what can I do to make myself better, to improve my circumstances for next time and improve my chances of making it, then you just keep getting better and better at it. And eventually you get to that point where you need to be. It's very difficult to be a natural at anything right out of the box, right? I mean,
Hmm.
very few people do the thing that they're, even if they're wildly successful at it today, started on the first day and were as good as they are, then as they are now. There's a process to it. And if you have that passion and that determination and the drive, then I think that is so important. So,
Hmm.
what piece of advice would you give to somebody who feels overwhelmed? Say somebody they're an actor, they're in showbiz, they're feeling that self doubt, they're considering leaving, finding that the family's finally getting to them. Maybe you should try something else, son or daughter. What advice would you give them?
What advice is to stay the course? And I kind of the one thing I feel that's missing in a lot of traditional actor education, whether conservatory or degree programs, is that resilience and grit part of it. It's going to take a while to get something. It's going to take a while to have something to launch things. So what I say is like, because I only work with actors that want to do this for their career. So the one thing I say is this is a long-term process. This is not an overnight success. You need to have a 10 to 20-year plan if this is something you really want to do. And I would imagine if you spent, over $100,000 for a degree program, you should want to do this for the rest of your life. So it's going to take time. And so one thing I often, we have to kind of map out our definition of success. By society standards, success in actor is someone has notoriety and has been in a lot of stuff. But what I say is success is getting to do what you love to do. Most actors that at least that I work with are getting into it because of they love telling stories. They love being, going in and playing another character. So in my view, I get, and again, everyone's view of success is differently, but we can look at success as being you get to do what you love every day, okay, for the rest of your life, then that's success. The other step is bonus. Whether you get that notoriety or that Tony or that Oscar, that's a bonus. So that is something that I think we really need to be conveyed. And if it involves weeding out certain people, I'm all for that in the beginning. Like if you're not really that committed, I would much rather you pursue something else than to waste six figures on a degree that you're never going to use.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, absolutely, and, I think that's, that's certainly really good advice, and I think just being upfront about it and honest, and I love what you said in the beginning of that too. It
Hmm.
does surprise me because I don't know a lot about performing arts education, but if they don't have classes or preparation to gear people up for the grind, that is a
Hmm.
shortcoming, because the fact of the matter is, for every person that just sort of got plucked out of the crowd somewhere and then, had this meteoric rise, there's a million people that are struggling to try to make it go. And
Hmm.
so you can't expect that to be your journey. If that happens to be it, and your first role is the thing that launches you, then great, right? But that can't be the standard, because that's easy, right? Success is easy to manage. If something comes easy to you, you don't need a lot of big toolkit to figure out how to keep going, because
Hmm.
you've got the validation already. But if you're in the process of trying to make it go and it's not moving as fast as you want, that's where you really need it. So, um, I love your idea, your concept of the happy file. Can you share with us what that is,
Sure.
and what its value is?
Sure. So one of the things that we often do when we're in spirals of self-doubt or even imposter syndrome is we often forget or delete the great things that we've already accomplished and how far we come. And this is not just for actors, but all entrepreneurs, as how what success have we already had. And so when we're battling or in the midst of like a cycle of imposter syndrome, we tend to delete all of that information. So the one thing is that Happy File is like a reminder. So you catalog, you write and document all the great stuff that you've accomplished, whether or not whether or not it's even current, but at least in the past, if you've gotten good accolades, good feedback, um, testimonials, or whatever that is, you document all of that. So when you start going into that moment of self doubt, which by the way everyone does, has those moments where we doubt, whether what we're doing is correct. You then pull out your happy file, and it reminds you of what exactly you intended to accomplish and why you're here and what you're doing. So it's like a way to really connect to your why or to your purpose, and your why is so important in any venture. Like anytime you set out to do something, you should always have a why already like well established.
I think that's great advice. I also think it's a great tool because, look, I'm guilty of it myself in my 20-year entrepreneurial journey. Anytime that there were lows, it's very easy to forget all of the things that you did that were good, and all the positive things that came out of it. And it's a shame that we're wired that way in some respects. It's too bad that we don't tend to appreciate. I mean, I think a lot of us skew toward the negative if we aren't, forcing ourselves or consciously thinking to be positive and all of that. And I think,
Hmm.
it is unfortunate because I think so many people have so much to offer, and we don't always recognize it because of our circumstance. And
Hmm.
so, being able to tap back into that, and tap into that purpose is so important, because that is the thing that will also keep you going. Um, in times that are rough, my wife and I tell our kids all the time, it's fine if you want to pursue something that you think is going to be financially rewarding, but at the end of the day, you've got to pursue something that you have passion about, because you spend so much of your life in your career and on the things that you're doing professionally, that to hate it, regardless of how much you're making,
Yeah,
it's not gonna you're not gonna feel fulfilled by that. You're
and
gonna
and
want to do some good.
and that's a good point because you'll see a lot of people that are making six, seven figures, even eight figures that are miserable,
Yeah.
bitter, resentful, and you would think, okay, they're making hundreds of thousands, even millions, or even tens of millions, and yet they're so unhappy. I mean, let's look at Anthony Bourdain, for instance, who wound up taking his own life. several years ago. He had it all, if you think about it.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
a brand, millions, it's not enough because it's fundamentally not, you're not happy. So the important thing is to really do what you love because you'll never see people on their deathbed unhappy about because they did something they loved that really didn't make them enough money. It's usually the opposite. I
Yeah.
didn't do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I worked in an occupation for fear, or I did something because I thought it was the right thing to do, but this wasn't my life. This wasn't what I wanted to do. And that's the biggest regret. Not I tried this and it failed. So that's the important thing. It's like, look, just go for it. And maybe you might need some backup plans for finances to pay the bills. Great, but still do what you love. And you know, and nowadays with the internet and everything, we have so everything available to us that we can learn anything and really pursue anything we want. So this is a time to kind of strike.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think for all the challenges that exist out there, there's also more opportunities than there ever were because we've democratized the ability to access information, the ability to share our voice, right, our ideas.
Mhm.
It used to be, and I mean, you have a show business background. It used
Right.
to be that you had a small number of gatekeepers. So if you were a musician, if you were an actor, like you had to, if one of these 5 6 record companies didn't want to sign you, you had no career, there's nowhere else to go. Now
Hmm.
you can put a video up on YouTube, and if you've got something, a voice, and you've got a look or something that people feel like they resonate with and they listen to your stuff, it will lift you by itself. Like you don't need, you can force other people's hands and get that recognition and build it on your
Hmm.
own if you have the talent behind it, which I love that part. I've seen that in athletics as well. There were people that were, undrafted, and they were people that weren't, ever on the track in terms of people's radar, but they put some things online. All of a sudden, training camps are calling them saying, "Hey, why don't you come show up at our training camps so you can try out for the team?" Because if you got talent, if you got an ability or something, now you have a chance to get it out there. So I love all of that. I think that's so important. I've heard you talk also about understanding personality traits, and you reference the big five. Can you share with us
Hmm.
what that is and how understanding that can help artists in their lives?
So one of the most, I think, most well-established models in business as well as organizational psychology is understanding the big five, which is five essential traits of personality. And it was popularized in the 80s and is still widely used today. So there's five traits that we all kind of share: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, all of us have different degrees of how we, some were high and some were low and some were in the middle. Now, this is one of the things I really covered extensively in my book. So the first trait that we refer to is openness. So how open are you to experiences? And it's really important to have an open mind, not just for show business or creative, but just in general as an entrepreneur. Of course, you especially need to have an open mind, and that means trying new things. And you could tell when people are very. Some people will tell you they're open minded, but they're not. And you could almost tell these type of people because they order the same thing on the menu every week. They'll go to a new restaurant, but it's like the same meal every week, and they're not willing to try anything out new. Um, Conscientiousness is the next one, and that is probably the biggest predictor of success in any field, especially for entrepreneurs and creatives, because that refers to your discipline, your focus, your determination, your work ethic, and a lot of people surprisingly are very low, especially in show business, in conscientiousness. And they all tend to overestimate how conscientious they are. And then when they actually take a test that measures the big five, they're really shocked to see how low they really are in conscientiousness. So one thing that's really important for creatives is to have a business background. I mean, that's why it's called show business, because let's look at the second word, business. And then there's extroversion. Now, a lot of people fall in the middle. Like I fall in the middle. I'm not wouldn't consider myself an extrovert, but I wouldn't consider myself an introvert either. It depends on the situation. But the important thing is if you're going to operate a business, or even especially be in any type of creative business, there has to be the ability to communicate and work with other people, and that requires a moderate level of extroversion, or at least training yourself to be somewhat extroverted. Doesn't mean you have to go to these large parties, or but you should be able to go to a networking event and be comfortable enough to do that. The next thing is agreeableness. Now, agreeableness is how willing are you able to accept feedback? Be coachable. Now, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be coachable, at least willing to listen and adopt and try out new things, and try out new perspectives, because this is another big thing that fails when people are so rigid in their ways. It has to be this way, or else. And then there's neuroticism. Now, neuroticism sounds a little more intense than what it is, but that refers to how well someone reacts under stress. Now, people with low in neuroticism tend to be very easygoing and laid back. People that are high in neuroticism are kind of high strung. They get easily phased, depressed, and anxiety. Now, I tied this into self sabotage because a lot of times these traits work in combination. So, the biggest factor that I found in my research for my dissertation is though is actors that scored high in neuroticism, and you combine that with low in conscientiousness. So it's like that level where it's high up here, low here. You tend to be much more likely to self sabotage. And so what we need to do if we're developing interventions is lower the temperature on neurosis, but then also at the same time help them develop systems, or entrepreneurs and creatives to develop a system to increase their conscientiousness, because everyone can increase their conscientiousness. It's not like we're something we cannot. We all can do that. We just may need a little extra help. And now with digital stuff, there's so many tools that can help us, with our focus and our discipline. So those are really how that all ties in together.
That's cool. That's really cool and really illuminating because it makes total sense when you explain it that way. And I know exactly what you're talking about when you're delineating the traits because I know people, I can pick those traits out in people. And I also think it's funny that you mentioned people will it's good to have some sort of measurement, mechanism because people tend to overestimate how good they are at certain things, which is
Oh
kind of
yeah.
funny. Um, it's like you said with the openness, "Oh, yeah, I'm a really open person," then every single thing they're not. And the conscientious thing is the same thing. "Yeah, I'm really conscientious." "Well, did you follow through on that?" "No, I didn't."
Hmm.
And you're like, "Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Consci That's the very definition of it, isn't it?" I mean,
Of
so,
course.
yeah, that is funny, and I think, but I see this too from the perspective of business. I coach a lot of entrepreneurs, and one of the things that's fascinating to me is you will have these entrepreneurs who, are in the throes of doing their business. And I've even coached entrepreneurs who help other businesses with their marketing and business growth, help them with their own marketing and growth because it's their own business. So they can't have the same relationship or viewpoint of it that they can when they're helping people externally. So they can help other people grow their business, but they don't know how to do their own. It's a fascinating phenomenon, but when sometimes we're so close to it, I think it's very hard. And you need that extra voice, you need that mentor, that coach, that person that's going to be able to tell you, look, I'm just being honest with you. Let's assess this, let's look at this, and then let's be real about it. Because I think
Hmm.
the better we understand ourselves, good and bad stuff, right? We all have good and bad. We all have things that we do really well and we can be proud about. We all have things that we struggle with, or maybe they're not our strengths. But awareness of that gives us the opportunity to make some adjustments and make some changes. And that's where the key is. If we're ignorant to it or we choose to ignore it, then that's where I think it can crop up and sort of bite us because we aren't prepared. And so,
Hmm.
I love that perspective. It's a great way to look at it. So let's talk a little bit about self-esteem. I know, self-esteem and confidence, this is kind of a double-edged sword. It's kind of interesting. Some people come across as very self-assured, right? They're cocky, they're arrogant, and it appears or masquerades as self-esteem, when actually I think a lot of times it's the opposite. But
It,
um,
mhm.
yeah, how do you differentiate between toxic high self esteem and healthy high self esteem? And why is it important to know that?
Well, I think that, to be honest with you, quite honest with you, it's the one really the simple answer is humility and being humble. So there's nothing wrong with being proud of what you've accomplished. There's nothing wrong with feeling that you deserve to have a seat at the table with success. But there's still that humbleness where you're still wanting to learn more new things. And so people that come off with cocky and arrogant have two factors. They believe that they're invincible. They don't need any more feedback because I got it all. I have it figured out. And then the other thing is they think that they're better than other people. So if you come across with those things, now how this ties into self-sabotage is you're not willing to learn. And very often they're so lacking in certain areas that they don't even see that. It's like a blind spot that you really don't see how you don't know everything you say you know. And they're not open to feedback. And they get the reason why I call it toxic high self esteem versus high self esteem is they're very fragile. So when you say something offering feedback or constructive criticism, they fly off and get really defensive. And I sometimes see this with actors, and where I'll give a feedback. I'll be on like a panel, and an actor will do a scene, and I'll say, "Well, this is what's missing, or this can be done better." And they almost some just get really insulted, like, "How dare you?" And I studied this. I'm gifted. I'm like, "Well, I know you're gifted, but let's look at it this way. Let's do it." So they get insulted very easily when you try to offer constructive criticism, and they're not going to grow, and so they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot. So that's like the biggest difference is humility. And I think it's always good to operate from a mindset I'm always learning and always want to learn new things. And that's why, like, in any field, you have all these conferences and networking events, which are so important to go to.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, I totally believe in the power of connecting with other people. It's one of the mistakes or regrets that I have from my entrepreneurial journey because I was a big believer for a lot of years that it was about putting my head down and getting stuff done. And it wasn't until years later when I realized so many of the struggles I had could have been shortened or could have been overcome much easier if I had connected with other people because other people already had the answers,
Yes.
and I had it sort of backward. I thought, oh, the harder I work, like that's how you get to where you want, when in reality what I realize is the more that you network and connect with other people, the more that you realize in general how decent people are and how good they are in terms of wanting to share and help other people. When you have that mentality, that sort of servant mentality yourself, and you're always trying to lift other people up, it's funny how that comes back to you, and other people feel the same way. And when you connect with other people, people have been like, the world's breadth of experience and depth of experience is impossible to even fathom. So the idea that whatever you're going through or whatever struggle you've got, somebody hasn't done that already. Of course they have. You got to connect with other people and find ways. And if nothing else, if you don't get answers, at least you get some reassurance that you're not alone. And a
Yeah.
lot of that is really important. And I'll tell you this, Albert, it's one of the reasons I started the podcast, because one of the things I wanted to do is tell every other entrepreneur that's out there, look, if you are hole up in your home office or your attic or your basement or whatever, and you're grinding away, first of all, keep going. Congratulations, good for you, because it takes a lot of guts to do that. But also know that you're not alone, even in those darkest moments where you feel like the world's against you, that nothing you do works, everybody else is successful automatically, and for you, everything's a struggle. It's totally not true because we've all been through
Yeah.
it. Everybody has those ups and downs. And I think that's really powerful messaging, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
And
go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say networking is so important. And this may sound counterintuitive, but all entrepreneurs should also be networking with your competition and looking up because they will be willing most of the time. I'd say 95% of the time, we're going to be supportive, and especially with podcast hosts and network with other podcast hosts, more established, because again, it can help you grow from there. So we if we take the mindset, and this is where again that healthy self esteem comes in, is we can all grow together collectively, and that's with any field.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. I've learned the hard way through the school of hard knocks, doing things too much
Yes.
on my own. Um, so you introduce techniques for raising self-esteem in your book. Can you share a couple of those things with us and maybe
Well,
a story or an anecdote?
so the one thing I will really tell you, there's really two that really stand out. One is the company you keep. So proximity is power. So you want to be hanging out with people or associating with people that are even a little slightly more successful than you are at the moment, because they'll build you up rather than hanging around with people that are negative. And that's why you hear the popular saying, "Show me your five friends, and I'll tell you who you are." So if you hang out with positive people, they're going to lift you up. They're going to boost you up, and you're going to increase your self esteem because you're going to be more productive, and they're going to be building each other up. So the company you keep is really important, and you need to be selective in who is in your inner circle. The second piece is to do something different, even something that is a little bit challenging or stepping outside your comfort zone. So maybe as an upper, going to networking events, or as a beginning speaker, going to different events like Toastmasters or different types of groups to give presentations, go live on social media, live stream, and just go for a couple hours. So those are some things that I would really say to do.
I like that. I can equate this back to actually, believe it or not, an experience in high school. So I ran cross country for 2 years. It was not very good. But, but I remember we always had this one practice where he would make us do this really long run. It was 5 miles out, 5 miles back. So for high school cross country, 10 miles in a day is a lot. And we got there at the end of the 5 miles, we also had to do sprints in the bottom of this, it was this area with a hill, and so called Powder Hollow. And so then we would run back the 5 miles, and everybody always dreaded that day. And everybody would always ask Coach, "Well, what's the Powder Hollow day? Don't worry about that." He'd say, "Just do what I'm telling you to do." And when the first time I ever did it, I remember feeling the dread of starting it off. But I have to tell you that when I got through it, because it was such a big challenge for me, I had never run long distance in my life before freshman
Yeah.
year cross country. When I got back, my whole mentality shifted because I went from afraid of it to feeling resilient and capable, because now I did something, like you said, beyond my comfort zone. I never would have voluntarily run 10 miles. And once I was able to do that, I said, "Oh, well, if I can do that, all these other practices are cake, right?
Hmm.
If I get
Oh
stranded
yeah.
anywhere in town, if my car breaks down, I can get home because I can run 10 miles." Like, there's all these little ways that really helps build you up. And it
Hmm.
does, it raises your own self-opinion, which I think is so important, especially in a day and age in a society where we're bombarded with images of perfection about everything, and taught to believe that everything in our life is supposed to be champagne and roses, or we're struggling and we're losers. And it's obviously ridiculous, but
Yeah.
that's sort of the world we live in with the social media element of it. So yeah, I think that's awesome. All right, so where can people find you, find your products, find your services, and connect with you?
So you can connect with me. Go to my website, albertbramante.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm very, easily accessible. And I'd love to continue the conversation. Also, check out my book on Amazon, Rise Above the Script, and it's available as both an audiobook and paperback.
Awesome. Thanks for that. All right, I have one last question I have to ask, because I always want to know what everyone's going to say, and that's, what's your number one tip for success as a business owner, entrepreneur, or in your case, an entertainer?
Show up, show up, and be consistent.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that, and I couldn't agree more. That's great advice. All right, with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again, Albert, so much for
Thank you
sharing all
so
your
much
great tips
for
with us.
having me, Brett.
Absolutely. Visit albertbramante.com to get his hypnosis recordings and follow him on Instagram at Dr. Al Bramante. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And as always, remember no matter what you want from your business and your life, don't compromise, optimize.